indoor environmental quality. So this category rewards decisions made by project teams with indoor air quality, thermal and visual comfort, and occupant satisfaction. So this category is looking at indoor environmental quality, but it's also looking at how you protect the health and comfort of building occupants. So materials and resource was a lot about, how are we encouraging protecting the environment and smart resource selection. This quality is looking at how is your building healthy for the people inside of it. This way we can enhance productivity, decrease absenteeism, and improve the building's value. So looking ahead, we've got 3 prerequisites. We have the minimum IAQ performance, so the minimum indoor air quality performance, environmental tobacco smoke control, and the green cleaning policy, all as our prerequisites. And looking through, we've got 10 following credits with the IAQ management program, enhanced IAQ strategies, thermal comfort, lighting, daylight and views, and then 3 green cleaning credits, integrated pest management, and our occupant comfort survey. So to start us off, we're going to start talking about the indoor air quality. And this is our first prerequisite. And the intent of this prerequisite is to look at and help contribute to the comfort and well-being of the building occupants by establishing standards for indoor air quality. So for our establishment, we're going to determine the ventilation requirements. How much fresh air do we need for the size of our building and the amount of occupants we have in there? And each air handling unit, we've got to make sure shows compliance to those ventilation requirements and how it corresponds with either case 1 or case 2, which we'll get to in a bit. So for our performance, we're going to show that compliance, and we want to take measurements of the system level. So we want to make sure that we've designed our building correctly and that it's operating as intended. So a good one to remember is ASHRAE 62.1. Now, those of you who work with these air intakes all the time, very familiar with building operating systems, ASHRAEs may not be one that you need to think about so much. But for me, I really had not worked with these different types of ASHRAEs beforehand. And so this is a good term to keep in mind. If you are not familiar with the ASHRAE 62.1, you want to connect that in your mind with indoor air quality. And so this is some good information when we're looking at the ASHRAE 62.1. There are 3 different types of mechanical ventilation systems. So this is good information to know either when you're looking at your own building or studying for the test. The first one we're going to look at is a single zone system. And when you're thinking about a ventilation zone, we'll see that a few times looking at these ventilation systems. A ventilation zone has to have similar occupancy categories, density, and air distribution effectiveness. So office buildings could all, different office spaces could all be a single zone system. Conference rooms could all be a single zone system. But for example, a private office and a conference room would have 2 different air intake needs. And so those would be 2 different systems. So just a good thing to keep in mind. So a single zone system is going to be a mixture of outdoor air and then recirculated air in the building to only 1 ventilation zone. So if you've got, a rooftop unit that's bringing in air from the outside and that mixes in with the recirculated air and it all goes to similar offices, then that would be a single zone system. So this is a good visual to have in your head when you're thinking of that air intake and the recycled air. So you have at the bottom left, you've got the fresh air coming in. And on the top right, you have that recycled air kind of mixes in the middle. And then some air goes back outside, and then some air goes into the ventilation zone. So our second type of mechanical ventilation system, we had the single zone, and now we're looking at the 100% outdoor air system. Now, this type of system really is brings only outdoor air directly to one or more ventilation zones. So for this one, you don't really have to think single versus multiple. You just have to be thinking this is 100% outdoor air. So it cannot contain any recirculated air. So that's a good one to remember for this one. You can see below for an example, there's an energy recovery unit that brings in 100% outdoor air and distributes it. And then we can count that as our outdoor air system. Good one to remember for this one, just can't contain any recirculated air. And so our last type of ventilation system is that multiple zone recirculating system. So we talked a little bit about those ventilation zones. So in this example, this ventilation machine, again, we combine our fresh outdoor air with our recirculated air, but this would disperse the air into different types of spaces in the building. So the air might go towards a fitness center and an office. It might go towards conference rooms and a lobby. So this is just a good one to remember. We've got multiple zones with outdoor and recirculated air. So an example, if you want to think of an example in your head, you could think of a rooftop unit that serves an entire building. So those are our three types of mechanical ventilation systems. We have our single zone, 100% outdoor air, and multi-zone recirculating system. So on the O&M exam, there's not going to be a question that's like, oh, you have an office building of 50 people. Which recirculating system should you use? That's not going to be a question that you have to see. So don't worry about that. As long as you know the difference between the three, then you'll be set for the O&M exam. All right, and so now that we kind of know the background of what this credit is asking for the establishment, we talked about case 1 and case 2 earlier. So case 1 is meeting the reference standards, which ASHRAE 62.1, as I told you to keep that in mind, your air quality. Or if you're not able to meet case 1, there are maximum rates that you can show that your building meets. So as long as you don't exceed the maximum, you could go for case 2. So for performance, you basically want to show, this is how our system runs. We take a measurement of the air and prove that our air quality is sufficient for the people inside the building. And you also want to have an HVAC system maintenance program so that the HVAC system runs properly and is maintained so that your outdoor air is not contaminated in any way. So now we're going to look at case 1. In that ASHRAE standard 62.1, if your system meets these required outdoor air flow rates, then you can say, yes, we meet ASHRAE 62.1, and you're good to go. If for projects that are outside the United States, then you use the CEN standards. Again, most likely you're not going to see that on the test. You're going to see ASHRAE 62.1. But let's say your building doesn't meet ASHRAE 62.1, there's option for case 2. And so if you can't meet those outdoor airflow rates, then you want to do an assessment of the outdoor air delivery rate and make sure that there's no less than 10 cubic feet of fresh air brought into the building per minute. So that would take, an engineering assessment, but what you want to remember is 10 cubic feet per minute if you're not able to meet ASHRAE 62.1. So the big thing of this credit is natural ventilation. We want to make sure that this building is getting all of the fresh air that it needs, and so that it's not just using the same recycled air over and over again. So for this credit, good ones to remember, ASHRAE standard 62.1. And we want to make sure that the building has the natural ventilation it requires. You may notice it says, or a local equivalent, whichever is more stringent. That just means if you're in a city that maybe has more pollution in it, and so the local code requires, more fresh air, something like that, then whichever one is stricter you'll go with, but most of the time it's going to be ASHRAE 62.1. So that gets us into our next prerequisite, environmental tobacco smoke control. So we're still thinking about air quality inside the building. And the intent for this prerequisite is going to be minimize the exposure of building occupants, indoor surfaces, and the air distribution system to environmental tobacco smoke. So you're not having to work harder to keep your air clean because there's tobacco smoke within your building. So no smoking inside the building, and the designated smoking areas need to be more than 25 feet from entries. 25 feet is going to be that key number you want in your head. You may have gotten a question like this on the LEED Green Associate. So you probably won't see a question that just says, oh, how far away does the smoking area need to be? You might have to have a question that makes you kind of think. But before you have to start, kind of thinking how would this go case by case basis, you want to remember there has to be signage within 10 feet that says no smoking within 25 feet of the building. And if you have a special case, this won't be on the exam, but in a real world project, if there's a code that prohibits you from prohibiting smoking, then when you submit, you just want to provide documentation of those regulations. So that's just a good thing to remember if that comes up in one of your real world projects. So this is for residential only. For all other buildings, we want to say no smoking within 25 feet, but gets a little bit more difficult when you say, no smoking in your own home. People don't take that too kindly. So option one, you could say this is a smoke-free building, but you can offer compartmentalization of smoking areas. So you make the smoking areas all on common areas of the building. So for example, all on one floor, but each unit has to prevent excessive leakage. So you have to put weather strips down, make sure that smoke is not going to leak out of the doorways, the windows, and get into other parts of the housing system. So whether that's the wall, ceiling, or doors, you want to make sure that you seal garbage chutes, mail drops, elevator shafts adjacent to those units so that your tobacco smoke is not getting into the other parts of the building. Again, quick reminder, most areas you're going to say no smoking, but for residential, if you want to provide smoking, these are the items that you need to meet. And this might be a question that you end up seeing, something about smoking areas. So that's a good one to keep in mind. And so reference standards for if you have smoking on site, these are going to be good ones to remember. Thinking how the leak testing, any criteria for leak testing, making sure that if you do have smoking on site, you need to test to see, okay, let's imagine that there was a giant fan inside the apartment. Could the smoke still get out? So as a quick example, you've got a 20-story condominium project that will permit smoking in residences on certain floors of the building. What's an acceptable way of demonstrating sealing of the residential units for environmental tobacco smoke control? So take a look at the answers. We've got A, blower door test, B, conduct air sampling, C, installing impermeable deck-to-deck partitions, or D, installing spray foam insulation. And so our answer is going to be the blower door test. And the tip at the bottom is a great tip. Look at the verbiage that they use in this question. They use the word demonstrate. So C and D are both great ways to make sure that, that smoke is not going to get through. Air sampling is verification, but it's only going to demonstrate air quality, not how well your construction test is working. So using that blower door test would be essentially like you put a giant fan inside the room and seeing if the smoke could get out. So verbiage is a great thing to keep an eye out on this exam. You want to make sure that you know exactly what they're asking, because for AP tests, they like to try to get a little tricky. So for example, the word demonstrating here, they've put in 4 answers that all look like they could be right, but that one verb is what tells us the answer that they're looking for. Great. So now we go into our first credit. And if you may have noticed, there was a third prerequisite, but that one will come up later. We're kind of grouping them into similar intentions within LEED so that we can kind of all stay on the same mentality. So we're still thinking air quality at this point. So we get into our first credit, which is Indoor Air Quality Management Program. So for our establishment, we want to develop an IAQ management plan. Another great reminder that I'm sure you've all noticed, existing building is all about plans and policies. How is this building going to run, and how are you going to make sure it runs that way? So for the performance, you have to construct an I-beam audit once every 5 years. So when you're creating that IAQ management plan, it's a great idea to base it on the I-beam model and include the facility's preventative maintenance schedule. So you're going to have to conduct that baseline audit during your performance period. So it's a great idea to look at that I-beam audit. So here's an example, looking at the outdoor air intakes, making sure that our outdoor air intakes don't have exhaust outlets nearby or cooling towers nearby, making sure that that fresh air that's coming into the building isn't going to be polluted somehow. And then our maintenance plan, making sure that we have our operating schedule laid out, making sure we know how our building is going to run. So for this credit, all you have to do is remember that you're going to base your plan off of the I-beam audit. And sticking with air quality, our next credit is Enhanced Indoor Air Quality Strategies. So we've already got our prerequisite, we've got air quality, we've done our I-beam audit. And so here are some enhanced strategies to take a look at. We have two options here. We could do option 1, which is about entryway systems, or we could do option 2, which has 5 paths for additional strategy. So option 1, entryway systems. Now, we want to make sure that we have permanently installed entryway systems that are 10 feet long, coming in from all spaces. So this could be grates, it could be mats, as long as it's permanently installed and you can confirm weekly maintenance, then that's what we're looking for. So option 1 is fairly straightforward. We're looking at the mats. Option 2, you can pick one of the following strategies and get an additional bonus point. So that can be mechanical filtration media, and we'll break all of these down in a second, but our 5 options are mechanical filtration media, CO2 monitors, outdoor air monitors for mechanical, outdoor air monitors for natural, and alarmed opening for naturally ventilated spaces. So a good thing to remember here is if you have the walk-off mat, you have 1 point. If you have the walk-off mat and one of these strategies, you'll earn 2 points. And then if you have the walk-off mat and 2 of these strategies, you earn an extra credit point. So that's just a good piece of information to remember. So let's break down these enhanced IAQ strategies. Mechanical filtration media, we want to have MERV 13 or higher filters in the building so that the air that comes through is as clean as possible. Second one are the CO2 monitoring in dense spaces. This was a question I did get on my AP O&M asking about CO2 monitoring. You want to remember that the monitors need to be placed 3 feet to 6 feet above the floor. So think a typical breathing range. Where is the most CO2 going to be? 3 to 6 feet above the floor. And so we want to make sure that readings are taken every 30 minutes. And you have your set point. This is how much CO2 is safe in the building. And then if it reached 15% above that, then the alarm needs to go off. So as a quick reminder, if you have monitoring in the return air ducts, that's not compliant. You want to make sure you have the CO2 monitors in that breathing zone. Outdoor air monitors, we've got 2 options here. We have mechanical ventilation, and natural ventilation. Now, a good one to take note of is that for mechanical, you have to measure the airflow at the intake, and natural ventilation, you have to measure the airflow at exhaust. And our last option are alarms for closed windows. Now you may be thinking, why would I put an alarm reminding me that my window is closed? And it's to remind you that if a key part of your ventilation system is that a certain number of windows need to be open, then you want that reminder that, oh, we need to open up our windows today to make sure that we get enough fresh air. So our exemplary performance, we talked briefly about. If you have an entryway system and you pick 2 out of those 5 paths, then you're able to earn 3 total points. So again, another way that LEED is trying to keep air quality safe. And if you're thinking, how could entryway systems affect air quality? LEED has done research that shows that it takes about 10 feet for the debris on your shoes to get off onto that walk-off mat. And so then that keeps the debris or pollutants, whatever may be on the bottom of people's shoes, from getting into the airways. So that's just a good reminder about why entryway systems are even in this credit. Now our next one is thermal comfort. So we're kind of starting to move away from air quality. And the goal of this credit is going to be continuous tracking of the air temperature, humidity, and airspeed. So we want to make sure that the goal of this credit is to have the tenants inside the building remain comfortable at all times of the year. So the establishment for this credit is that we need to have a permanent monitoring system in the building. And if you need a new system, if your building doesn't have one, or you're updating it, you want to install and complete the upgrade before your performance period begins. So you want to have that system already in place before your performance period starts. And then once the performance period starts, you're basically going to prove that the monitoring system is functional. So here's where we get to our second ASHRAE, ASHRAE 55 for IEQ. So this is a good one to remember. You may already have this from the LEED Green Associate, but your ASHRAE 62.1 is going to be air quality, and ASHRAE 55 is thermal comfort. So ASHRAE 55 lays out the requirements that your building would need to meet to earn this credit. And then option 2 is again going to be if your building is not in the US, or you need to meet these other standards. You can either do ISO 7730 or the other CEN standard. So you just want to ensure that your building can perform at the desired comfort criteria. So again, our reference standards, good one to remember. Just remember the difference between ASHRAE 62.1 and ASHRAE 55. And so if you're thinking, okay, what would those standards look like? This gives you what you want to set your standard as for the different types of rooms you may have in your building. And it conveniently has winter and summer, so that you don't have to use as much energy cooling your building down in the winter or heating it up in the summer. And so you want to collect this baseline information to establish the set point in your building. Again, set point for thermal comfort and for air quality is a great word to remember. You want to make sure that you have that set point created so that your monitors know what to look for. So for the performance period, you have to have continuous monitoring set up in the building. And so you have to have a temperature and a humidity sensor per zone. So talked about those different types of zones. If you had an indoor pool and a laundry room, you would want to make sure to have different sensors for each zone. And so you would record those measurements in 15-minute intervals. And the things like intervals are a good thing to keep in mind, because you might get a question asking something like, oh, one of the maintenance workers at the building took the first reading at noon, when should the next reading be? Then I wouldn't say put that at your top priority, but it's a good thing to keep in mind when you're reviewing this testing information. And then during the performance period, we want to do that periodic testing so that we can prove to the lead reviewers that our monitoring is meeting the baseline. So we want to make sure to measure airspeed and the radiant temperature. For the monitoring system, you should have alarms set up similar to the CO2 meters. When the CO2 got higher than a certain acceptable level from the baseline, the alarms went off. You would want alarms similar to that, where if the temperature gets too hot, too cold, the humidity gets too high, where it can let the building workers know and they can make those adjustments. So similar, you should have a written procedure for repairs and should calibrate the meters to the manufacturer's design. And so the calibration and the testing are the two that you'll need to do during that performance period if you're pursuing thermal comfort. So for this credit, good things to remember: ASHRAE 55. Remember continuous monitoring, and during the performance period, we want to do testing and calibration. And so 2 adaptations to keep in mind. Data centers, thermal comfort only applies to regularly occupied areas. Hospitality, this does not apply to guest rooms. And then gyms and kitchens and vehicle facilities are not included in this standard. So if you were trying to get a LEED certification for gym or kitchen, you would want to write out in your plan basically what your set points are, how you're monitoring that criteria, and how it meets the intent of the credit. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility with those 3. Right. So the next credit we'll be looking at is interior lighting. So, we're still thinking occupant comfort here. So we want to reduce the glare and the contrast between surfaces, ceilings, and walls. And we'll see more productivity from occupants if we increase the controllability and lamp life. So we have, for interior lighting, we have 2 options. Option 1 is lighting control, and you could also go for lighting quality. So there's nothing you have to do for the performance period. Once you prove you have the needed items for option 1 and 2, then you're set to go for this credit. So looking at option 1, we want to see controls for 50% of the individual spaces. Now, it's private offices, that's each individual desk in an open office, and we want to see 100% lighting control in group spaces. Now, when you see 3 lighting levels, that means you can't just have an on-off switch in a conference room and count that as your lighting control. So in a group space, you want to see, an on-off switch in a dimmer, or an on-off switch in blinds, occupancy sensors. Basically, need a little bit more than just having that on-off switch. A multi-switch would count. And then for individual spaces, we're looking at like outlet-powered task lighting. So, people have lamps on their desks, that would count as lighting control for individual spaces. So this one is very straightforward. We're just looking at percentage of people that have access to lighting. Option 2 is where we get a little bit more vocabulary intensive. So we're thinking lighting quality here. So the building has to implement 4 of these strategies. So looking at having your maximum luminance be a little bit lower, color and rendering index more than 80, high rated life in your lamps. So you notice a lot of LEDs often have, a longer light life for each light bulb. Limit direct overhead lighting. Lower the surface reflectance. Increase the furniture reflectance. And then your wall to work surface illuminance and your ceiling to work surface illuminance must be a ratio of 1 to 10. So the first 4 are characteristics of lamps. They're a little bit easier. Looking at the lamps you implement in your building. The last 4 are surface material factors, which could require fewer lumens to deliver the same illumination levels. So the first four are a little bit easier to look into. The second group of four is looking a lot at the material choices inside the building. So to give you an example of like coloring rendering index, you can see how the light does render color. So looking at an incandescent bulb that might be, higher than 95, fluorescent, which is higher than 80, and then high pressure sodium, which is less than 25, you can really see the difference that the CRI makes in these colors. Frankly, when the CRI 60, all the colors kind of vaguely look the same. And then when you get to 90, you can really see how that change in the light bulb really affects the vivacity of this picture here. So a few adaptations to keep in mind. Retail, option 1 only applies to offices, so you don't have to give customers the ability to turn lights on and off in a retail store. And then hospitality, it does not apply to guest rooms. So our next credit is looking at daylight and quality views, so kind of staying on that same trend. Now, daylight and quality views, LEED has this section in here because it reinforces the circadian rhythms of the body, helps to fight depression and increase healing times in retail sales. So giving people access to views and daylighting can really improve their mood and their quality of work. So again, we have two options. And when you're going through these credits, note which ones have two options and what is needed to get those two options. Because again, you'll probably not see very many case study type questions where they're saying, oh, we're looking at an office building, what would be the better one to go for? But they might ask you something like, this building is going for daylight measurements, what is required? And then show you some options. So for daylight and quality views, we've got option 1, daylight measurement, and or option 2, quality views. So there's a good number of points you can get from this section. And again, this one is similar to lighting where there is nothing you have to show in the performance period. If your building is set up to achieve this credit, then you will be good to go. So option 1 is measurement. So you have to measure the daylighting coming into the building, and 50% of your regularly occupied floor has to achieve these 4 criteria. So you have to measure twice a year. You have to measure between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. And the lighting has to be between 300 and 3,000 lux. Those are numbers you want to keep in your mind. Between 9 a.m. 3 p.m. twice a year, 300 to 3,000 lux. I did get a question that said, the initial measurement was taken May at 9 a.m. What time should the second measurement be taken? And so here is a good table to kind of give you an idea of when your second measurement should be. If you've gotten your measurement in the middle of summer, you want to try to get it in winter so that you can make sure that your building is getting the amount of daylight it needs to year round, whether the sun's in the sky for 12 hours or sometimes in the winter it feels like it's only up for 2 hours, but you want to make sure that your building is getting that appropriate level of lighting. And our second option come into quality views. So we're still looking at 50% of the regular occupied floor area. And they either need to have multiple lines of sight, interesting views, unobstructed views, or a view factor of 3 or more. And so 50% of this floor area has to have 2 of the 4. And you're probably thinking, okay, some of these seem kind of open to interpretation. So we can go into a little bit more description. So we're looking at 90-degree views. Then we want to see where that window placement is. You can see the white is compliant and the blue is non-compliant. So if you have occupants that are able to see 90 degrees apart, then you can count that as an occupant who has a view. second one is having interesting stuff to look at. So that could be flora, fauna, sky. You have movement of people or vehicles. Unfortunately, the wind blowing through the trees does not count as movement for this section, so good to remember people or vehicles for movement. Or if they can see objects 25 feet from the building. So if you've got interesting stuff to look at through your windows, then this is another one you can pursue. And you have to meet 2 of the 3 for this one to keep in mind. And unobstructed views. This is our third one we're looking at. From the interior, you have to see, you have to be able to see out the window. So the key feature for this credit is thinking about cubicle heights, thinking about, low cubicle partitions, or some places have windowed partitions, so that people working in the interior of an open office can still see to that window. And so view factor of 3, 0 is very poor, we have no views. 5 is high quality, and it is based off of this Windows and Offices study of office worker performance and the indoor environment. So if you're thinking about views of 3 or more, you have to consult this book because it depends on the layout of your floor plan, on if you have that view factor of 3 or not. It's based on angles and views. So for the test, all you need to remember is view factor of 3 or higher to be able to achieve this point. Now, here's a great way, this visual shows a great way that you can try to get those views. So for example, if you've got glass used in partitions, then that's a great way that you can extend the number of people that have views in your office. And stay away from frosted glass if you're pursuing this credit. And so you may see something looking like a question asking, what's the best way to maximize the views in an interior space? And looking at these partitions is a great way to get make that happen. And for quality views, if you're looking at different types of views, remember we said you want 2 of the 4, you have to document the space by space with private offices, open offices, conference rooms, kind of similar to those zones we were talking about with air quality. You want to make sure that you have your different zones laid out and views into the sunlit interior space. So any view that lets into like an atrium is allowed to count for 30% of the spaces. So a lot of buildings that are able to go for this are ones that have, a lot of offices on the perimeter, the ones that have smart furniture choices for open offices that might be kind of close to the interior of the building. But if you have a nice atrium inside your building, you are allowed to count that for some of the space as well. And so looking at those adaptations, for warehouses and distribution centers, both storage, sorting, and distribution portions only need to meet 25% of regularly occupied areas. So again, that's one you're likely you're not going to see on the test, but good to keep in mind. And so now we get to our last prerequisite. The first 2 dealt with more air quality and tenant satisfaction. So we grouped those in with those credits. Now we're going to get into green cleaning. So this first prerequisite is very similar to those purchasing policies we talked about in materials and resource. And the intent of this credit is to reduce levels of chemical, biological, and particulate contaminants that can compromise air quality, human health, building finishes, systems, and the environment. Now, before I get into this credit, Dean, I know we've almost, we're about 4 minutes away from top of the hour, so would it be best to go through this credit or to go through any questions, final items before we close out for the day?
Kelsey, great job. Thank you for all this. What an immense amount of information. We have just a few questions that we were able to answer. So I think we're good. If you think we can wrap this prerequisite up and then you go ahead and close out the call at 3 o'clock, then let's finish.
All right. Yeah, we can definitely get through this policy before we wrap up the day. So
Awesome.
again, we've got our classic two options, which you love to see in environmental quality. So this one again is going to be policy related, just like materials and resource. So you have option for your own in-house green cleaning policy or a certified cleaning service that has their own policy. But you want to make sure it addresses these green cleaning credits, the goals and strategies, and personnel who are in charge of maybe purchasing or cleaning, maintaining items. So you want to make sure you've got your procedures, materials, and services mentioned in your green cleaning policy. So these are the credits that kind of go with it, purchasing and your cleaning equipment. And these are good criteria to remember for next week once you start getting more in depth in environmental quality. Green Seal is something that you'll see a lot for cleaning supplies and cleaning chemicals, which means good for the environment. A certified cleaning service may be with the Sanitary Supply Association, so that means that they have good cleaning policies. Or if your project's outside the US, there could be a local equivalent to look into. So the reference standards, Green Seal, again, you are going to see that a lot in the last few credits in environmental quality. So if you're creating your own policy, then you want to make sure that you have operating procedures, going to make sure that you're citing the green cleaning credits, goals and strategies of your own policy, what you want to see happen, and the personnel who are going to be working with this policy. And then you want to create a tracking plan so that you've got, you can track, water used during cleaning. You want to make sure that you are checking on the chemicals used, the products purchased, and the equipment purchased. As you'll find out later, these tie in with further green cleaning credits. So you want to make sure to track and report that progress. Goals and strategies we mentioned, you want to make sure that maintenance systems are kept clean, that cleaning is consistent, that the cleaning chemicals are protect sensitive occupants, make sure they're not too strong, make sure that there is safe handling and storage of the cleaning chemicals, including a plan in case there's a hazardous spill. And then for your personnel, you want to make sure that you know who's in charge of what, make sure that if there's staffing shortages, who's in charge of that. Make sure that you get the custodial staff's input and feedback, and determine frequency of training as well. So the last thing you need for this prerequisite is a third-party audit every 12 months. So make sure that the cleaning vendor certification is current. If you have that third-party vendor, make sure that you're tracking, the chemicals, water used to clean the building. So for this prerequisite, just good to remember, it's another policy that we want in place to make sure that the building is running efficiently. So last thing for today is adaptations for multifamily and multi-tenant, and you're only required to create this policy for what is under management's control. So if you have a 30-floor office building, but tenants on floor 20 and 25 are taking care of cleaning themselves, then you can cut those out of your cleaning plan.
So that sounds like a really fancy name, custodial effectiveness assessment. It's actually really simple. It is essentially an assessment of how clean the building is. We basically get to score the building and assess how good of a job our janitorial staff and our cleaning staff are doing, and how clean the building actually is. In terms of achievability of LEED O&M credit, this one is pretty easy to achieve. In every O&M project I've ever worked on, we've achieved this credit. It's a pretty straightforward one. As far as what you need to know for your exam, basically what it involves is doing routine cleanliness inspections. So making sure that we're keeping track of how clean the building is, looking at what areas maybe that need some cleaning improvements, creating sort of a continuous improvement process to make sure that the building is being maintained and that it's as clean as it possibly can be. And then actually doing an audit annually. So we do one cleanliness audit per year. And we also have to do one during our LEED performance period as part of the O&M effort. So that audit itself is actually called an APA audit. Sometimes this credit is referred to as the APA credit. APA stands for Association of Physical Plant Administrators. That could be something that shows up on your exam. They may ask you to define what APA stands for, Association of Physical Plant Administrators. And it's basically just this process of auditing the cleanliness of the building. So essentially what we do within the APA audit is we look at lots of different space types within the building. So for example, if we're looking at an office building, we look at cleanliness of open office areas, private offices, break rooms, conference rooms, meeting rooms, stairwells, storage rooms, elevators, lobbies, entrances, the loading dock, lots of different space types. And so we score those different space types within a number of features. So we're looking at the cleanliness of the flooring, cleanliness of the walls, lighting fixtures. Is there any dust on the lighting fixtures? Are there any smudges on the walls? We look at restrooms. Is there trash on the floor in the restrooms? And those kind of things. And so we score the building on a scale of 1 to 5 in each one of those space types and each one of those surfaces. And so the lower the number, the lower the score, the cleaner the building is. So in order to earn the actual LEED credit, in order to earn the custodial effectiveness assessment credit, the average score of the entire building has to be 2.5 or lower. So again, lower is better. So that's where that 2.5 number is important. You do need to know that number for your exam, 2.5 or better. If the score is under 2, then we can earn an exemplary performance point. So this is actually a really easy credit to be able to achieve exemplary performance. We also have to audit at least 10% of the total number of rooms by type. So for example, if there's 100 private offices, we have to have at least audited 10 of those. We also have to audit 10% of the entire square footage of the building as well. So we typically would do this as part of a building walkthrough, part of an audit. This can be done, ideally it's supposed to be third party, but it can be done by your LEED consultant. It can be done by a member of your janitorial team with the property manager. Lots of different folks are capable of actually doing the APA audit. I'd mentioned those scoring systems from 1 to 5. So these are kind of what the levels entail. Level 1 means orderly spotlessness. Level 2 is ordinary tidiness. Level 3 is casual inattention. Level 4 is moderate dinginess. And level 5 is unkempt neglect. In most cases, at least buildings that I've done these audits for, usually your scores are going to be in the 1 to 2 range. Occasionally we'll see some 3s. That's usually found in, some of those storage rooms or maybe a loading dock or something like that. Typically it's in that 1 to 3 range. Most buildings that are pursuing LEED for existing buildings and operations and maintenance are, operating that green cleaning policy, operating a high performance green cleaning program, and are kept pretty clean. So that's the gist of our custodial effectiveness assessment credit. Pretty easy one to achieve. The next credit we'll talk about is another one of our green cleaning credits. This one relates to products and materials. So this is the actual products and the materials that are being used to clean the building. And so what we're looking at here is a calculation. And the calculation is done by cost, annual purchase cost. So how much money are we spending on our cleaning products and our cleaning materials? And in order to achieve the credit, 75% by cost of those products have to meet LEED's requirements. And so what products are we looking at? What qualifies under green cleaning products and materials? Well, we're looking at things that we use to clean the building, right? So cleaning products, disinfectants, floor polishes, floor strippers, hand soaps, janitorial paper products, and trash bags. So again, 75% of our total cost needs to be compliant with LEED's standards, and we'll talk about what those standards are in a second. 75% of the total cost during our performance period needs to meet those LEED requirements. So A good way to look at this credit is look for those materials and those products that are higher dollar materials. In most cases, in many LEED projects that I work on, it's the paper products. So we're buying a lot of toilet paper, or we're buying a lot of seat covers or hand towels. And so meeting the requirements for those products, those are typically higher dollar costs than maybe the hand soaps are, or the occasional floor stripper that you have to buy, or something like that. So typically, we really want to try to max this out with the paper products. The trash bags, the trash can liners are a little bit more difficult. It's less easy to find those in sustainable formats, but it is possible, finding trash bags that are made with recycled content or compostable or things like that. But in general, looking mostly at the paper products. So what does LEED mean when they talk about compliant green cleaning products? Well, those are products that meet certain reference standards. And so these are ones that are really important for your exam. Definitely want to make sure that you know these. Anytime there's a reference standard that supports a LEED credit, definitely want to pay attention to those. So products that have the Design for the Environment seal from the EPA, products that are FSC or Forest Stewardship Council certified, maybe those paper products that are made with FSC content, all our hand soaps, we want those to be Green Seal certified, and also the Environmental Choice certification standard. So that also includes Eco Logo and Environmental Choice CCD. It used to be called Environmental Choice CCD, and now it's the UL Eco Logo standard. But so those are the ones that we really want to focus on from a cleaning product certification standpoint. Those are the ones we want to purchase for our buildings. And how we actually document this. So we keep track of our purchases and our costs, on a monthly basis. What products are we purchasing during our performance period, and keeping track of that in our LEED calculator spreadsheet. But we also have to provide cut sheets. We also have to prove and provide a cut sheet or a safety data sheet that says that the product meets one of those standards. So for example, a safety data sheet from 3M for their 3-in-1 floor cleaner concentrate product. You can see right here highlighted on that data sheet that it is a Green Seal GS37 certified. So we would highlight that on our cut sheets. We have to provide 20% of the total products that we're claiming that are compliant. 20% of them we have to actually provide the cut sheets for. So this would be an example of one of those. This credit is available for exemplary performance. We can earn a bonus innovation point if all of our purchases are compliant, so 100% of our total cost. Moving on, our next green cleaning related credit in indoor environmental quality relates to the actual equipment. So this is the actual equipment and janitorial equipment that's being used to clean the building. So it's not just the paper products and the soaps and the flooring cleaners and window washing cleaners and those kinds of things. It's the actual equipment. We're paying attention to what equipment is being used in the building to actually keep it clean. So a lot of this stuff, if you're not regularly, involved in building maintenance, maybe sort of out of sight, out of mind. It's not something that you really think of a lot, but there are vacuums and floor burnishers and carpet extractors and lots of equipment that's being used to clean a building. Maybe you're familiar if you're walking through an airport terminal, and you see somebody riding one of those big riding, carpet extractors or big riding vacuums. So there are certification programs that focus on those kinds of equipment. So our green cleaning equipment is also based on cost, but it looks at the inventory. So LEED for existing buildings, operations and maintenance, is well aware that there will be an inventory of equipment that's already in place. Remember, the building has to be, a certain level of occupancy. It has to have been occupied for at least a year, have at least 12 months worth of operating data before pursuing LEED for existing buildings. So the credit is well aware that there likely is an inventory and equipment that's already in use. So it's not saying that you need to change out all of that equipment. You need to buy a whole bunch of new equipment. It just means that 40% of the equipment that is currently in place, whether that's existing or if you need to buy some new equipment to exceed that 40% threshold, just 40% of the equipment that's in use at the building. If you meet it prior to the LEED performance period, then great, you don't have to do anything else. But it's possible you may need to buy an extra vacuum, or you need to buy a couple of new pieces of equipment to make sure that you achieve that 40% threshold. So it's 40% of the inventory by cost. So how much does it cost to buy a new vacuum? And how much does it cost for all the equipment that's in place at the building? How much do those pieces of equipment cost? 40% of that total cost needs to meet LEED requirements. So we need to meet these standards here. So we'll talk about what some of those standards are, but in general, the equipment needs to have some sort of safeguard. So safety measures, safety pieces of safety equipment on the actual equipment. It's got to have an ergonomic design, so something that's easy and ergonomic for its users to actually operate it. Ideally, it will have environmentally preferable batteries. Typically, those are going to be gel batteries. And also, we have to write a phase-out plan for equipment that is non-compliant. So it doesn't mean that we have to get rid of all the non-compliant equipment right away. We just have to have a plan so that when those pieces of equipment reach the end of their useful life, we have a new sustainable option that can replace that piece of equipment. So specifically related to vacuum cleaners, we want our vacuum cleaners to be CRI seal of approval. So that's the Carpet and Rug Institute seal of approval. It's their green label vacuum program. So those are the standards that support vacuum cleaners. They also have to show a certain sound level. They have to show 70 decibels or less, so that's 70 dBA or less. You have to be able to meet both of those requirements. I've run into this on some LEED projects where we show, a certain type of vacuum that's CRI seal of approval. It's got the green label, but it's 71 decibels, and so that's not compliant. It has to be both CRI seal of approval, green label vacuum, as well as 70 dBA or less. Specifically for carpet cleaning, so this is typically going to be our carpet extractors, or those wet-dry vacuums. The CRI seal of approval for deep cleaning extractors, and the seal of approval for deep cleaning systems program. So those are the two standards that support our carpet cleaning products. For our powered floor cleaners, so these are typically going to be the burnishers. Again, it has to meet that ergonomic design. It has to show those safeguards, but also a sound requirement here, also 70 dBA or less for our floor burnishers. Again, another exemplary performance option here. If 100% of our total inventory, so all of our cleaning equipment is compliant, then we can earn an exemplary performance point here. Okay, moving on. Next credit relates to pest management. So early on in the, I believe it was in the sustainable sites category, there's some elements that talk about exterior pest control. This credit specifically within indoor environmental quality focuses on interior pest control. So having an integrated pest management policy, an integrated pest management plan, this has to be in place during the entire performance period, and ideally after that performance period is over. So there's a couple of different options to meet our integrated pest management credit. The first one is having an actual policy, an in-house integrated pest management policy. So this would be a written plan that guides what the pest management strategies are for the project, and there's a bunch of different requirements within that. We'll go over that in just a second. The second option is contracting your pest control service out to an integrated pest management service that has achieved a particular certification. So meaning that pest control company is certified as a green pest control or integrated pest management service company. So both of those options exist and are available. As far as establishment goes, again, this is just within option one, so this is the actual policy. We have to have a written policy that talks about pest control inspections and monitoring protocols, specific action thresholds, preventative measures, using least risk pesticides, so those low chemical, least toxic pesticides. We'll talk about kind of what that means in a second. We also want to have communication practices in place. If certain pesticides are being used in certain areas, obviously they're going to take care of the pests, but there may be a human health impact to that too. So we also want to make sure that this policy and the protocols are in place to let people in the building know, hey, there's a chemical that's been put down in this area. You may want to steer clear of this area. And then from a performance standpoint, during the performance period, we have to keep some good records. We have to have a pest control service log where we're tracking all of the different pesticide applications or service reports or actual pest control activities that are happening at the building during the performance period. So some elements within this policy, we want to make sure that we have good sanitation practices. So the policy is going to talk about things in place that will prevent the need for pests to show up. Keeping a break room clean is a good way to prevent ants from showing up. So making sure that the building is clean and having good sanitation practices, cleaning up spills quickly. We want to make sure that we're looking at exclusion or barriers. So, keeping landscaping a little bit further away from the building, 18 inches away from the building, sealing up any cracks or sealing up any screens on windows, just preventing ways that pests could get into the building. So rather than allowing the pests to get into the building and then having to use chemicals, if you seal up some of those cracks and prevent them from getting in the first place, that's less chemicals that we need to use for pest control. The pest control policy is also going to look at, the integrated pest management policy is also going to look at traps. So it does talk about rodent bait stations. They have to be in solid blocks outdoors. No rodent bait stations indoors are allowed at all. And sort of those more humane ways to capture pests. And from a least toxic pesticide standpoint, there's a San Francisco hazard criteria list that looks at pesticides, looking at tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 hazard criteria. So the tier 1 and tier 2 products are the ones that are obviously going to take care of the pests, but more harmful to the environment, whether that's harmful from a water body standpoint or harmful to the environment in general, or potentially really harmful to human health. So LEED recognizes specifically the San Francisco tier 3 hazard criteria. So those are going to be the less toxic, more natural type pesticides. So ones that are either more environmentally friendly or made from more natural materials. Mint, peppermint oil is a good one that works really well for cockroaches and ants. So using some more natural-based products. And so that's on that San Francisco tier 3 hazard criteria list. Those are pesticides that are LEED compliant and can essentially be used at any time. On the second option of our integrated pest management or IPM credit, we look at our pest control vendors, whoever is handling the pest control service for your property. Those folks need to have a specific certification, an acceptable provider certification. So this is just another option to achieve this credit. For example, if you're using a certain vendor that is Green Pro certified, EcoWise certified, Green Shield certified, those are the 3 that are recognized officially. We can earn this credit just by checking that box, providing documentation, proving that that vendor is actually certified under one of those programs. USGBC will also recognize other equivalent IPM standards. You just have to provide a little bit more documentation to prove as to why it's not one of the other 3, Green Pro, EcoWise, or Green Shield. Just proof that it is equivalent to those programs. Okay, another credit here is our occupant comfort survey. So way back early on, you may have talked about the location and transportation credit, where we looked at doing a transportation survey. So this is the other area within a LEED O&M project where we would look at doing another occupant survey. So instead of asking people how they get to and from a building and looking at the carbon footprint impact of transportation to the building, Now we're looking at how comfortable are people actually within the building. So this is a pretty easy credit to achieve as long as you can reach the response rate, get enough responses for the survey. As long as you meet that minimum response rate, you can earn the point essentially just for doing the survey. So what the survey entails is doing one survey every 2 years or one survey during the performance period. So typically, if it's a brand new project, never done LEED before, you just want to do one of these surveys during the performance period. We try to tie it into our transportation survey so that we're doing both surveys within the same survey and not doing two separate surveys, just a little bit more efficient that way. In general, the survey needs to cover 5 elements. So we asked people, how do they feel about the acoustics in the building? How do they feel about cleanliness, indoor air quality, lighting, and thermal comfort? And so we have them rank the building. Typically, it's a 7-point scale. So either 1 to 7 or -3 to +3. I like the -3 to +3. I think that's just, it's a little bit easier to understand negative to positive versus 1 to 7. But essentially, we just need to ask people to score the building, say from -3 to +3 on each of these 5 elements. If any of those elements show more than 20% dissatisfaction, so dissatisfaction means if we're using that -3 to +3, it would be -3, -2, or -1. Anything from 0 to 3 is considered positive, but -3 to -1 is that dissatisfied area. So if more than 20% of your responses in any of those 5 areas, cleanliness, lighting, noise, any of those areas, if 20% or more people are dissatisfied, we have to provide some sort of corrective action plan. So this is a good idea and a good area where we can identify, are there areas in the building that maybe people are really uncomfortable? If, maybe we can find some themes. If an entire facade of the building, everyone on that side of the building is hot, maybe we have some HVAC or set point issues that we need to deal with. If everyone's cold on one floor of a building, maybe that shows that we need to do a little bit more investigation. Certainly, we're going to get those types of comments that are, oh, my neighbor smells bad, or the person in the cubicle next to me is too loud all the time, so they give a -3 for noise or something like that. Certainly, we'll see those kinds of comments, the typical hot and cold calls and things like that. But in general, we're able to look and use this survey as a general barometer for how comfortable are people in a building. So again, we have to show a written corrective action plan, show what we're going to do to correct some of those issues. So it may be just as simple as building engineering staff visiting those particular occupants or visiting those office spaces and, finding out if people are hot or cold, maybe adjusting some set points, things like that. Just some sort of written corrective action plan, again, if our dissatisfaction is more than 20%. This is just a screen grab of kind of what one of those typical surveys could look like. So, asking questions about air quality. How satisfied are you with the air quality in your space from -3 to +3? Does the air quality in your space enhance or interfere with your ability to get your job done? Asking some leading questions about lighting or acoustic quality. Just, again, a pretty simple survey, just asking, again, -3 to +3, how comfortable are folks in the building? Okay, so wrapping up indoor environmental quality, talked about the daylighting and quality views, credit, looking at how much natural light maybe is being brought into a space, or do building occupants in those regularly occupied spaces have access to quality views? It's not just, do you have a view out a window? Is it a quality view? Can you see interesting things? Can you have that connection to nature? Can you see things that are far away, or see movement of flora or fauna, or things like that? So when we talk about synergies, again, we're trying to tie in different technologies and strategies within our project that can help, for lack of a better phrase, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Maybe we can implement some strategies that help earn some LEED points in multiple areas. So a good synergy, and a common one we see is, this daylight quality views, where we're bringing in more natural light, giving people that view to the outside. Maybe that reduces our need to provide additional interior lighting. So maybe we can shut off overhead lights, or maybe we can provide some task lamps instead, give people that access to their own lighting controls, reduce the amount of overhead artificial light that we're providing, which is then going to reduce our energy consumption, reduce our energy use, and then provide people that connection to nature. Also, with the interior lighting, we also want to make sure that with commissioning, when we're either recommissioning a building or doing a certain level of energy audit within an O&M project, we want to make sure that that lighting system is working appropriately. Maybe there's occupancy sensors, or maybe there are photo cells or timers. We want to make sure that all of those systems are commissioned appropriately, that they're actually working in the way that they're supposed to.